and welcome. Welcome to a new episode of Delvin's Garage. We'll call it new because we have a new garage that we're working in. Beautiful colors, and this opening sequence, you get a view into what Skynet has been collecting from all the players in the game. Look at all those cannons on that hex. So let's jump right in. That's what we want to talk about today, cannons. So we're going to go in the garage. Today I want to talk about a particular cannon build that dominated the meta at one point. It was called the Spartan series of builds. It dominated the meta, and it was a cannon build with basically after basically the Eagle attack cockpits or the attack cockpit series came out. Um, it has a shield set at an angle in front of the cockpit and the protecting some of the legs. We're going to actually build it from scratch. That's what we're going to do today. Instead of loading it up, we'll just go right in and get the business of building it, and in the process talk about it. So first thing we need to talk about as far as the Spartan goes, the original variations, and there was endless ones, but the original variations were going to be more durable than they are today. At one point, the Spartan meta was broken by a rebalance that made cannons much heavier, made the attacker cockpits heavier, and the biped chassis that it ran on, the load capacities were reduced drastically. So the build was, for a long time, unavailable to basically be reproduced. You couldn't make it feasible. And then there was some more rebalancing, and under that new rebalancing, the Spartan was reborn. The last variation looks a lot like the current variation, but it was more durable, had a lot more weight, and the cannons could fire a lot longer. Now cannons, they have a damage increase. The weight is still pretty heavy, but the biggest portion of change would be in they do higher damage than they used to, but a lot of parts have gained durability. They do higher damage than they used to, but they had a much higher velocity, a longer range, and a longer extreme range on those guns, because of the current version has a larger shell and a huge drop off. Cannons currently are basically a medium range weapon, but primarily a shorter range weapon, because the drop off and the velocity of the shell doesn't give you the ability to land consistent shots at any kind of medium range. You can still do it, but it's become very difficult. And all that said, cannons are still a very potent weapon. So let's start with the chassis, or the mobility. Pop all the rest of these off and scroll through. So there's a bunch of chassis here. The starter chassis for biped is a Hound, with a good load capacity and 1500 health. Then we start to go into the Hunter and the Colt. So your low end for health on the biped chassis, you're looking at about 1100. The ones I use on the Spartan are going to be enforcers, and let's confirm that. So with a 6,335 load capacity, they've got about 1900 health with a 10 armor durability. 10 armor isn't the best, but it's something. It's 10 armor. Big thing is load capacity and stability for cannons. Health is important, obviously. At the 1900, it falls in the middle of the pack with the rest of the bipeds. The stability of a 570 shares as the highest stability for a biped leg, because to be honest, if you can't shoot your cannons straight, they're useless. You have to hit. You have to hit with them. Um, you can have all the cannons in the world on a build, but if they're not landing, they're doing nothing. So we use the highest stability biped that we can get. And it's not necessarily for all pits, but on this build, this stability is necessary, a 570, to bring the guns together. So, top speed isn't the best, but it ranks up there in the top 70%. And the same thing with the rest of the stats. Acceleration is biped acceleration, as you see. Some are faster, but a 15 is a pretty high end stability. It's got a good top speed, 55, and a good reverse speed of a 48. It's got an excellent braking, which is equal across the board at 100. And the turning speed isn't the best, but it's not the worst. So overall, the mobility of the Enforcer chassis ranks in higher than average, but isn't the top across the board. So it's like the above average across many of its stats, which is why another reason I use the Enforcer leg on this build. So after we get the chassis going on, the Spartan, in the original concept, I did not want to have a spine. I didn't want to have a spine. I wanted it to be a shielded pit, but not have the vulnerabilities of being a spine build. I wanted you to have to either blow off the leg or blow off the pit. Those were your options. And I wanted it to be protected and have a decent profile. So all those things played into the design build of the Spartan, and still do. So the next part would be the cockpit. We want the cockpit right off the chassis. Now the original Spartan was born out of the attacker pits, and it used to be an attack protected eagle, but due to load restraints of the legs, I have to reduce it down to a regular attack eagle that has a weight of 910, about 1200 health, a 35 armor, and it can shoot up to 4 weapons in the group. It used to be 3. It's recently been upgraded to 4. On the Spartan chassis, 4 versus 3 doesn't make a difference. Fire delay is a good stat. At a .025, it's not obviously not the best because you've got like darts out there and such, but it's fast enough where the weapons in sequence fire quickly. And the aim stability of a 55 isn't the best either. It falls in the medium range. It's a media core build as far as stats go. And those are the the sacrifices you have to make. Not every build you build is going to be able to pull off the best in any one category. The beauty of the Spartan is it pulls off the best of mediocrity is the word I'm probably looking for. It's the best of the medium. It's slightly above average in a lot of categories, and you can pull that off with the restraints that are involved. So it doesn't have the best of everything, but it's above average in just about everything. So we've got the attack eagle pit, and the big reason why we want the attack series of pits is this little spacer off the front of it on the eagles and on the attack hawks. In this case, we want the eagle for durability reasons, and because the eagle has this back part here. The eagle pits are nice because they're slender profiles from the front, and that plays into all of the things I like in the game. It's profile. So the next piece I want to throw on here is going to be, let's go right to the cannons. Before we get into everything else, because cannons stacking on this build can be difficult with all the points, so before I add anything else, let's go right to the guns. So we're going to pop off the cockpit, pop in weapons, and a bunch of different subtypes, which we will deselect all of them, and get down to the guns. So some important information there. So cannons changed pretty drastically a few times, but in the current balance of it, I like to, and for this build and the load cap, originally Spartan ran with HD Y6s that were full hex size because biped legs had a good load capacity. They could handle it. But now they can't. Not in the same quantity. You could probably put 4 on it. And for the same weight of 4, I can get 6 what I use Lycon times 2 HDs. Now you'll notice the difference between the Lycon HD and the times 2 HD. Well, these are about 30 pounds more expensive, and for that 30 pounds you get a 30 velocity and a longer sight. That's what you're getting. Now, the velocity helps you hit targets because the bullet reaches target faster. And the sight helps me hit targets because it's not a box and because it gives you a zoom in of double the zoom of a normal HD. So with the better ability to see what you're aiming at, and the faster velocity allows you to hit more often, in my opinion. So we're going to duplicate this using the duplicate button. We want a total of 6. And usually in the Spartan we're going to fire them 3-3. And weapon location is key here, and can be difficult to set up sometimes. So on the first gun, we're going to rotate the barrel at a side. And we're going to put it on the back nub, like so. And I rotate the barrel so that the barrel is pointed farther away from the pit. And there's a reason for that. The next barrel I'm going to put on is going to be the main firing of the first sequence. The barrel is going to be aiming upwards with no rotation off the side of the original gun. And that adds a bigger shield for my spine. One, and it allows the sequence to fire downward as it goes towards the center of recoil. The next gun I'm going to pull in is going to be facing up as well, and pull off that spine as well right there, so that these guns won't pop off unless the original spine blows in that gun. And now that gun is protected from most directions, from splash, and from direct fire. You'd have to hit a very small silhouette to pop the spine gun. The next gun is going to go similarly and touch this bottom one on the side. I'm going to spin it so it's easier to place. I want it to actually sit in the same direction as that bottom one. Not like that. Just like that. So now this gun is spined to this gun. If this gun pops, this one does as well. But once again, it's protected from splash or attacks from the side. And from this direction it's protected from the pit, and you'll see it's further protected by the shield once we get there. Now these bottom 2 guns, because this first series is going to be these 3 guns. The second series of fire is going to be this outer gun into these bottom 2 guns, which are coming off the front nub of the build, which also helps protect the cockpit. This first one we're going to spin into an upside down. And I'll actually set it and rotate it so it's on the side so it places easier. So it's going to draw that connection point right up and be facing downward. The next gun is going to be facing upwards, and you'll see how this places in. I'm going to put it sideways so it places easier and places in. And again, you end up with almost like a crescent firing pattern, all moving and rotating towards the center nub where all recoil stems from. So as the top gun fires, it's going to pull these other guns as it recoils in the direction of that top gun, so that this gun will line up from where that fired, and this gun will be closer and line up to where the last gun fired in line. The idea is it's always pulling the next gun in sequence in line with the last gun that fired, in line with the recoil of the build. So we go back to the idea that cannons have to shoot straight. Next thing we're going to build on this build, only a few parts left, simplicity at its best. We're going to pop the weapons off. We're going to jump right over to spacers. Small spacer in the game, small angle spacer. You'll see it has next to no armor, next to no weight, and next to no health. But in this case, at least it has a high heat threshold, so it doesn't just cook off instantaneously. It's hard to burn that part off. We're going to click on here, and we're going to rotate it so that it sits at that 45-degree angle. Now, there's lots of ways of putting shielding on your build, and a lot of times you get like a straight, 180 degree exact opposite angle from the build, so you get as much surface area from a front attack. In this case, we're going on at 45, and the 45 does two things for us, two primary things. The 45A, it helps protect from the angle of the 45, because you can turn your torso to enable your shield to get that full balance of attack from that flank. And it gives more coverage of the build overall at that 45. And at the same time of giving more coverage of the actual parts that you want to defend, the 45 gives a smaller armor profile, and therefore not covering as much of the material, well, quite simply empty space. So now we're going to pull the armor part up. We use an RP LP 1, and the reason for that, it's a heavy armor piece, and it's pretty low. It used to be a 6 or a 1 dash LPRP 1 dash 5, and that has the front and back armor plate. But with weight restrictions, that part is no longer viable to build the build with. So we've gone back to the LPRP plate 1 or I, and that one has almost a 2,000 durability with the 55 armor rating. I mean, that's a lot of weight to sacrifice, but in this case, this armor plate that we'll be using defends a lot of your sensitive parts, adding that extra durability to the build. We rotate it around, and now the look of the Spartan is almost complete. As you'll see, when you turn your torso and angle it towards the attack, it blocks the pit, it blocks one of the largest parts of the biped, which already has a small profile, which is this big base at the bottom and the hips. So you got the big, your big base or your crotch region, and the hips that are protected now by the lower portion of that shield. The upper portion of the shield blocks the cockpit, and the front area of the shield helps block the nose and the guns. So from that angle, you get maximum protection over the entirety of the build, protecting it with a 2,000 health piece, which adds that durability to the build. The weak point being that small spacer in the back. But the shield, angled in like it does, protects that little spacer very well. So very rarely will you lose the shield to an attack unless it comes from this area right here. If they throw some splash in there, you'll probably lose your shield. But the build isn't decimated by a loss of the shield. At that point, you gain a front profile that is very smooth, and you still have your weapons. And the weapons defend the cockpit. See how they're all lined up? So what this does is it gives you an angle of attack from here is defended. Straight ahead is defended. And at this angle is defended. And all those things adding together create this encirclement of your most vulnerable part, which is your cockpit, protecting it. And the last but not least part that we need to generate, now with no energy generation whatsoever, as things lie, you're at minus 200 energy, which reduces you down to a 45 speed. So even if your generator blows off, you're still not ultimately crippled. You can still function and fight, just at a slower acceleration and a slower speed overall. With the generator, you get your speed. The Scener X420. That we're going to place right on the back of the build. Now you can ride it like this. This is a good place to ride it. That would work just fine. Or you can slim it up and go more vertical instead of horizontal. That works as well. That's usually how I run it, just to avoid any, splash catching it at an angle a little bit better. Give it a little more shield protection and pit protection for it, but it will run just fine rotating it like so. It'll work that well. That just gives it a nicer profile from the side. Either way, it'll run. So that energy brings me up to a positive 220. It gives us a 60 kph, which is very quick. Not the fastest biped or the fastest M.A.V out there, but for an attacker, that's a good speed to get into range to use your cannons. Now, into weapons. As I said before, my first series, and then my second series. Now, if you're a master pilot, which I am not, but if you're a master pilot and you practice and you get good with it, and it just comes intuitive to a lot of players, the second set of weapons would be good to use. Of course, you could go to a 2-2 series. So if your first cannon got blown off or is crippled, you can go to a second camera, and you could do something like this, so that you have backup cams. When I run the build, primarily I don't do that, and because I get very excited under stress, and I sometimes pull up the wrong weapon group and desync all of my weapon series. So a lot of times I won't run with those two other weapon groups in place. But better players, it's nice to have backup cameras. Nothing worse than having a super fuzzy camera you can't shoot out of. And to end the sequence, even though it wouldn't fire straight, it wouldn't be terrible if you added that one gun that might have a bad sequence. It would fire off. It wouldn't shoot as straight, but putting an extra bullet out there at that point isn't a bad thing. In the case that it's still there, you just can't see out of it. And now take it out. Oh, well, maybe we should paint it. No, we'll just leave it white. And that's the Spartan Reborn. Not as durable. Doesn't have the long range, but it still has a lot of things going for it as far as cannons are concerned. So we'll take it out for a run. Single player match. No Man's Pass, one of my favorite matches, or my favorite maps. And we got some enemies, and we'll launch. So heat's a new part of the meta. Previously, we had flamers that did a lot of damage. With the new heat system, heating M.A.Vs up was temporarily basically taken to a point where it didn't have a huge effect. Now heat has a large effect on the game. And this build has no radiator. The cockpit doesn't act as a secondary radiator. The biped legs generate a lot of heat. So heat is a natural enemy to any kind of biped because they generate a lot of heat. So something to keep in mind when building a build at this point would be your ability to siphon heat off. Now the cannons, since they're light variations, they act as mild heat sinks. Each one of them can draw off 3 heat. And the build overall is kind of warm. It's a big armor plate. Just something to keep in mind. Try to avoid getting burnt too much because your legs will cook. I love this map. Now this map is a cool map. It's negative 45 degrees Celsius, which adds to your protection against heat. After all, it is a big ice map. Those shots landed well over, but they're already taking shots. Now the profile, once again, your legs being a kill part, your cockpit's pretty well, almost all protected by that front shield, and your guns on the right hand side, and the generator in the back. So direct fire, this build is very well protected. But with the shield placement, where it is at that horizontal 45-degree angle, it allows you to utilize terrain to protect the rest of your build while still having the guns along that firing line. So, something along that lines protects my legs. Look at that build. That is an AR hound. I better start pulling my A game out, because they are coming. So the cannons shoot pretty straight. I think I've got that pit just about popped. That was a rhino. If you make your shots. Now that is a hex cannon build, and it's potent. So I'm taking a beating right now. Most of that beating that I took was to my front shield. I'm going to use the terrain to defend, and use his large bulk to enable me to kind of fire into his leg without taking ultimately too much damage. Still busting me up hard. But if you'll see, my armor plate, which was a 1900 plate, is down to 12%. It's down to, you know, about 100 points. And my leg is at 46%. And it started off at around 2K as well. So if I had taken all those shots to my leg or my pit, I would not be here right now. Now that is a nice combo right there. A cannon, Howie build. And I do not want to get my back against something. He is now taken and busted my leg down to the point where the build turns slow. Two things happened there. One, my leg was crippled, as you can tell by the flames jettisoning from it. And two, the Howies landed behind me and popped my Jenny off. I had already lost my shield. See how those cannons come together. And you'll notice during this that I just cycled through naturally and had some shots that were off. My most accurate is going to be 1 and 2, and I was cycling through. So the 3, which isn't lined proper, isn't going to fire proper, just like the 4. Comes at like an angle. So 3 and 4 weapon groups don't line up. But they give you a decent camera shot if you're go fuzzy. Now you'll see my weapons didn't take a lot of damage there. The shield protected them. Right now my cockpit's at 60% and my leg is busted and my Jenny's busted due to that splash from behind. But overall, my guns are still in play. Which, you know, without guns, can't do much of anything. Other than be a mild annoyance. Or possibly survive to the end of the match, keep the match going, if you've got more damage on their base than they have on yours. I am damaged to a crawl though. My maneuverability's been taken. And the last build looks, I think this might be the last build. Looks like a machine gun. I'm going to try to egg him into coming after me into closer range. Because out in the open, those machine guns will finish my legs off. And it looks like he's got... it's going to kill me. Oh no. And that's the end. Defeat. Alright, so that's the Spartan build in short. It was a good match. I was broken down through the different builds, and the final build just got me. My accuracy wasn't all that great. I definitely missed some shots, and I definitely cycled through those weapons incorrectly, which I figured I would. Yeah. Have a good one.